University of Applied Sciences, a training program of 3 years, a BA, was put into place. This is the deaf president of Lithuanian Deaf Association in 2019. Before we had a deaf association, we had different clubs where we could belong to. And where deaf persons were working in a factory, that's also the social gathering place that they attended. Next, please. So we have 5 main cities in Lithuania. We have about 3 million 3 million total population. Next, please. As I said, there are 5 main cities. And in each city, the government would provide special housing. And those homes, and the funding or the social grants received from the various the city governments, they would then provide money to individuals such as deaf persons. They would have to use that funding for paying for their homes, paying for food. So paying for an interpreter was never on the list of priorities for them. There wasn't much left to pay. Then the city Vilnius, which is the capital, we decided to have a sign language interpreter association, but that only came about from the Deaf Association. And because we were from that association, the government decided to also fund us. The Department of Social Ministry decided to fund all interpreting services, which meant that as a deaf individual, you did not have to pay for interpreting services. This was now widely available to you, and the government would pay for those services. So even though we had a rough start, we still needed interpreting services. And initially, we had about 1 interpreter for 140 deaf people. And then it became 70 deaf people to 1 interpreter. It improved. So next slide, please. Our deaf community did not ask to grow the pool of interpreters necessarily, but we as an association, when we went to the government, they said, well, deaf people did not ask for the service. Why do you want to be a service that's recognized by the government? And that was quite a long process. Next slide, please. So this is the president of the Deaf Association, and together we went to government to explain why we needed a bigger pool of interpreters and that we had to be compensated fairly. And we achieved many of our goals. We didn't do this alone, but we did it in collaboration with the Deaf Association. Next slide, please. Here is one example in Lithuania. This is our president. During COVID, he always had an interpreter present in his public briefings. But it did happen once that they started a briefing and realized that the sign language interpreter was not present. They, on short notice, got hold of an interpreter, but they made use of public transport to arrive. Do you think that meeting went ahead? The camera crew was there, the audience was there, but everyone waited until that interpreter arrived, 40 minutes later. And only then did they continue with that briefing session, because the interpreter was then present. So this country president of ours was really good, and we had a very good relationship with him. And deaf interpreters were part of many briefing sessions, such as what you can see on the screen. Next, please. Next, please. And here you can see during COVID, but this is now a time when COVID wasn't as active anymore, and they could allow more individuals in the room during, not always available beforehand to the interpreters. But we lobbied for that. And you know that your president usually wouldn't give you his speeches before he starts a speech. But we were able to receive the text about a day before the time, or some time before the actual event, which allowed us to interpret appropriately. So we have a lot of respect for our government trusting us in that way. Next slide, please. Language. And learning a language, this one indicates what your skill level is. It goes all the way up to C2 level, which is conference level, and being very fluent. So as an interpreter, I cannot work at A1 level, for example. In Europe, we have many languages that are spoken. And this was applied to spoken languages, yet it wasn't necessarily applied to sign language competency. Making sure that you have sufficient level of sign language skills. This was another important part of what we had to do. And we followed this model to ensure that we have the skills, the language skills installed and trained in the universities to ensure that when you have variations, that you are able to work with that. You might have a BA degree in interpreting, but you also need to have a level C2 language skills in sign language to be able to work as an interpreter. So it was important to connect the training program for interpreting with the language skill level, which is C2 in this case, to be working as an interpreter. Next, please. Next. So in Lithuania, we established the sign language interpreting services. We have our organization in place. We had training. But then we had to discuss the ethical issues. We all had the formal training in place. And they also had a very clear differentiation between an interpreter who could specialize in a specific field and those who could be maybe a social worker / assistant. And that those two roles never would communication of what teamwork should be. When we provide a sign language interpreting service, we need to make sure that both parties have access. As a team, in that conversation, we need to make sure that we're all working towards the same direction. And also make sure that it's not just one person's responsibility to ensure quality. As a team, we all are responsible for that quality service provision. So if a deaf association works in one direction and the interpreting association works in a different direction, there's no collaboration and the quality of work and that service will definitely suffer. Am I still good for time? Thank you. Next. Next. It's now the second part of my presentation, which is in the same document. Please go on. Next slide, please. Just waiting for technology. Okay. So in Europe, if you look at the West and the East, in the West, they had more universities, interpreter training programs and translation programs, whereas in the East, not so much. The attitude was still very much helping, and that was the approach to how deaf people would have access to information. So having funding really made a difference, and having access to a university made that possible for the deaf people to have access to quality interpreting. Now in the East, this was not the situation. Thank you. May I have the next slide? Next. Next. Thank you. Here we go. So what is the deaf interpreter? I think Razak has given quite a good explanation to what it is, but I'd like to add, can we go to the next slide?
The concept of a deaf interpreter is not a new profession or a new concept. We've had deaf interpreters working historically for years now. We do see in the UK there's quite a large number, so there might not be as many known deaf interpreters in your country or your region, but there are still deaf interpreters working, and we have known about this for quite a long time. In a professional sense, it might be seen as more of a new concept, but we have always had deaf interpreters around. Next slide, please. We have Lydia as our Vice President of WASLI, who was the Vice President. We had Juan Carlos Dreta from 2007 to 2011, who was from Argentina. Prior to that, we had Nigel Howard, who is from Canada, or after that, proceeding, from 2015 to 2019. I am part of the board as the Deaf Interpreter Advisor. The goal of WASLI isn't to check the box of how many deaf interpreters or hearing interpreters we have in the association or on the board. It's to make sure that we are working sign language interpreters and that it is individual. And we're able to then give an example to the world as to what deaf people and deaf communities can do. As I mentioned in Lithuania, we had to figure out how to best start our interpreting associations. We did that with the help of the deaf associations. And it might feel like quite a large task, but you are all able to do the same thing in your countries as well. You have different associations to provide support. You could call on Afsli or use WASLI for assistance. You have Dr. Stone that you can approach. We have so many resources available to us, and we can see what other countries are doing and then adapt that to best fit our own local contexts. I know I'm short for time, so I'm kind of rushing a bit through my slides. Can we go to the next slide? This is again looking at Afsli, the European form of sign language interpreters. This is Clark Denmark, who is the president of Afsli, and was also a prior Wasley president as well. I'm sorry, Liz Scott Gibson, interpreter correction. And then we had Clark Denmark as well from the UK. Next slide. These are all deaf individuals. Now, from my own experience as a deaf individual, coming from a deaf family, sign language has been a part of my entire life. Lithuanian Sign Language is my main sign language. There's also some influence from Russia, from the occupation in Russian Sign Language. I've been involved in the Deaf Olympics. I've had exposure to different contexts and international spaces where I've been able to I've had to adapt my language to then, it forms into an international sign. Through the communication I've had in these international spaces, I've been able to go to. Deaf school, where I did have to do some speech therapy and speech training. They would sit the deaf students next to each other, and then we would sign to each other to kind of maybe, interpret for us. And so I've kind of been an interpreter since I was a child in school, helping my deaf peers and friends in our speech therapy whole life. And I grew up multilingual. A very experienced to many codas. Next slide. Raining quite hard right now. Afsli encouraged the training of deaf interpreters, so we did a spring school in Prague, in Czechia, in 2010. This is a photo from that gathering. Next slide. Workshop in 2010 of deaf interpreters. I'm trying to see who is in the photo. Dawn, were you there? Who else was there? And we've had various workshops since then. Afsli provides a host of trainings. Next slide. Next slide, looking at the difference or the similarities between deaf and hearing interpreters, and if there even are any differences. We're doing the same job, whether you are a deaf interpreter or a hearing interpreter. You are facilitating language and communication. The language use is the same. The information we're facilitating is the same. The qualifications, our world knowledge, the code of ethics must be practiced by both groups. Me, as a deaf interpreter, I need to know the culture of the hearing majority of the country I'm working in. And same as hearing interpreters, you need to know deaf culture and history and so on. Next slide. So that was some of the similarities of our work. I feel like I'm yelling. Now, next slide. We're going to look at the differences in our work. We do have a difference in our cultural norms and our identity as deaf and hearing interpreters, and a difference in the channel of which we communicate. Some of the ethical considerations. I can put us into three categories. We have hearing interpreters, codas, and deaf interpreters. Hearing interpreters go to work in the morning, they do their job, and they go home at night and back into their hearing environments. Coda interpreters are, again, also going to their job in the Monday through Friday. And then on the weekends, they're hanging out with their deaf parents or their deaf family members. So they're still involved in, very rooted in the deaf community. And now me, I work as an interpreter. I go into an assignment, I do my job. When the job is over, I then go to different deaf social gatherings. where people are talking about someone maybe being arrested or someone riding a motorcycle. And so I have to keep maybe a very neutral face because I might already know about what happened because I was interpreting that event. Someone who maybe is fined for a speeding ticket or... So I'm being told these stories that I might already have prior knowledge to, or someone might say, oh, it was you were interpreting there. And so the boundaries are a bit harder to navigate. So there is a different set of code of ethics for us as deaf interpreters. Next slide. Next slide. Again. And as Razak also mentioned, deaf interpreters are working in their national sign languages as well, in multiple spaces, courtrooms, hospital settings, universities, classrooms. Next slide. Next. International sign assignments happen much less frequently. There is maybe a conference that happens every once in a while, a large sporting event, working with migrants. Next slide. But the day-to-day is in the national sign language. One more. Now, deaf interpreters have what we call DELK, Deaf Extra Linguistic Knowledge. Next slide. Next. Next. One more. Now, when I do my work in Lithuania, I don't call myself a deaf interpreter. I'm a sign language interpreter. My qualification does not say that I'm a deaf interpreter. My bachelor's degree says that I'm a sign language interpreter. That is the qualification that I have. So we often get asked this question, why do we give the specific label of a DI or a deaf interpreter when that's not the qualification that is specified by our work? We have to receive the same training, we need to have a qualification. So we don't have whether it says a DI or an HI on our qualifications. When we co-work in our blended teams, we have our build to trust, our working relationships. For those of you who are hearing interpreters working in teams and blended teams, we need to be aware that working in teams really is how we do our best work. Next slide. So we are working as one, as a shared team. Next. Keep clicking it down, there's a whole list. Now, not just anyone can be an interpreter, as many of us know. So if you are a deaf individual and you are wanting to be an interpreter, there are considerations you need to make to be able to do that work. You have to have some of these qualifications. Next slide. Next. Just in the interest of time. I want to give a bit of an overview on the ISAB, ISAAB overview, which is the International Sign Accreditation Advisory Board. So we have WFD and WASLI members that make up the ISAB team. And we